Today we are celebrating the third anniversary of his release from detention. And it is my honor to welcome everybody who's taken the time to join us on this webinar. You'll recall that in his capacity as Secretary General of the consortium, at 6:15 p.m. on the 17th of January 2017, along with Agbobala, Ayapol Abine, and others, Dr. Fontem was abducted from Buea and taken to Yaoundé. In Yaoundé, they were initially held at the SED before being transferred to the notorious Kondengi prison. However, on 30th August 2017, following a decree by Cameroon's President Biya, they were released from detention and all charges dropped. Now, people don't realize this, but had they been tried and convicted, they would have faced the possibility of a death penalty. That is, something to contemplate, I think. So today, let me just present the outline of the program for this webinar. My co-moderator, Dr. Susan Rice, will introduce me, and I will do the same for her. And then she will then introduce the speaker for today, Dr. Fontem, who will make his remarks. Following Dr. Fontem's remarks, Dr. Rice and myself, we will moderate a Q&A session. And after that, we will allow Dr. Fontem to close the webinar with some concluding remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Rice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kilo. Maggie Kilo, my co-moderator, is a retired international civil servant and fragility expert. She holds an MA in Sociology of Education from the London University Institute of Education and a PhD in International Development Education from Stanford University School of Education. She served her country as an educator and a researcher for many years prior to joining the international development community. In 1998, she joined the African Development Bank, where she's held several positions in both country operations and policy review. Between 2006 and 2008, she served as the bank's resident representative in Sierra Leone and was later appointed to head the newly established Fragile States Unit. In August 2011, she was transferred from the temporary relocation agency of the African Development Bank in Tunis to Monrovia, Liberia, as resident representative of the African Development Bank in Liberia, a position which she held until her retirement in 2017. Her Excellency President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf awarded her Liberia's highest non-national civilian medal, Dame Commander in the Most Venerable Order of Knighthood of the Pioneers of the Republic of Liberia. Thanks so much, Dr. Kilo.
Thank you. Dr. Susan Rice is principal of Rice Mediation and Facilitation, LLC. Her consulting practice provides facilitation, mediation, and training in several arenas, including peace processes, international organizational matters, and environmental issues. Dr. Rice is also an adjunct faculty member at the American University School of International Service. She teaches conflict assessment and prevention and international negotiations in an online master's program, as well as at the University of Denver's Corvell School of International Studies. Dr. Rice has conducted several training courses on mediation, facilitation, arbitration, negotiation, and conflict resolution skills. She's the author of Extreme Facilitation, Guiding Groups Through Controversy and Complexity, authored in 2005 and published by Jose Bass and Wiley, as well as numerous articles She's earned her bachelor's degree from Brown University, a master's from the Institute of Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, and a PhD in International Relations at American University School of International Service, with focus on peace processes. Since 2019, she's been supporting peace efforts in the Southern Cameroon's Anglophone conflict in Cameroon, and she stands ready to support any and all actors pursuing a peaceful resolution to the crisis. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you. And now for an introduction to the guest of honor, Dr. Fontem Neba. Is an academic, political, and civil rights activist who at different times in his life has fought for the rights of students, university lecturers, and eventually the freedom of the English-speaking people of Cameroon. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and was a senior lecturer at the University of Buea, where he taught and supervised master's and doctorate students. In 2016, he coordinated teachers' trade unions and built a vast but peaceful protest which paralyzed the entire English-speaking part of the country. He was the founding Secretary General of the Consortium of Civil Society Organizations, which advocated for a return to the two-state agreement between La République du Cameroun and Southern Cameroon as it was in 1961. He was arrested, as Dr. Kilo overviewed a bit, on January 17th, 2017, and detained under harrowing conditions for 8 months. He stood trial at the Yaoundé Military Tribunal and was charged with terrorism, inciting civil war, and other crimes punishable by the death penalty under the Cameroon Penal Code. But thanks to local and international pressure, he was released on August 31st of the same year, and we are very glad that you were, Dr. Neba. Ever since his release, he has advocated for a peaceful resolution of the root causes of the war in the Southern Cameroons. So it is our honor to turn the floor to you, Dr. Neba.
Yeah, I feel extremely honored by the presence of these two very erudite women, highly respected and admired. I have never stopped showering them with encomiums. They have distinguished themselves in their respective fields. And I learn a lot whenever I come close to them. And I am greatly humbled today that you have taken time off your very busy schedule and come to moderate this discussion, which marks a watershed in my life as a political and civil rights activist on a mission to liberate my people through my very modest effort using civil society and other well-wishers like you. I would like to first of all say something very briefly relating to the arrest or the abduction. In fact, for the first time in my life, I came face to face with what I believed was supposed to be the end of my life, because the way we were abducted, people in the neighborhood saw us being taken into a car, but they didn't know that we had been taken away. They thought that it was part of the movement, friends in the movement, because it was a combined operation by the police, the gendarmes, the Navy, and the Army and the Secret Service. So it is when we were taken out of the neighborhood that I realized that it was actually a convoy that was accompanying us. And that morning I had gotten information that the government was planning to arrest us, to abduct us and to eliminate us on the highway. So I asked the commissioner of police sitting next to me, where are you taking us to? And they said, to the police station that is just a kilometer or two down the road, down the street. And I said, okay. When we passed that police station, my hairs stood on ends. And I asked him, you said you were bringing us here. Where are you taking us to now? And he said, well, we are taking you. And unfortunately for him, he thought I wasn't speaking French. And so he was on the phone telling somebody that telling them how they were moving and that they will be where they are coming and they'll be there in about 30 minutes. Immediately, I swung into action, opened the door of the car because I was sitting in front and he was sitting next to me, close to the door. I, first of all, moved my hand, put off the engine of the car, my left hand, put off the engine of the car, and as the driver was struggling and the person next to me was trying to figure out what was happening, I sent my hand under his armpit and unlocked the door and opened it. So in that confusion, they didn't know what was happening. I stretched my right leg and blocked the door. So people gathered to find out what was happening, and I shouted. I said, "These are the consortium leaders being kidnapped." That is how the information circulated on WhatsApp. And our peers in other parts of the country who did not know what was happening got the information and had enough time to escape because they too had been marked for arrest. Actually, the government was planning to interrupt internet at a certain hour and arrest everybody since information would not be able to circulate after the interruption of internet. So somehow that singular act saved an entire movement. The rest is, as you know, we were, the war horse hoods took us to an unknown location. The following day, we appeared before a magistrate, and our charges were read, and we were taken to Kondengi, where we began 8 very harrowing months. I want to acknowledge the sacrifice of my peers in this struggle, those who started the struggle with us and who eventually gave up their lives. Our hearts go out to them. I remember Penn Terrence, T. Conrad, and the others who are still in jail. Every day I pray for them and I ask that the Lord will strengthen them and that the end is not far. I also acknowledge the sacrifice that our people have made, families, relatives, and my friends in the diaspora who cannot go back home until this issue is resolved. That is why I have committed myself and the rest of my life to finding a peaceful solution to this conflict so that all of us at last may find a place to call home. Why were we arrested? Why were we released? We were released simply because of the action of the international community and our peers in the diaspora who did not relent. And so I want to acknowledge the US government, the EU, and other countries, the African Union at that time, who did not, organizations, Amnesty International, Scholars at Risk, and the international lawyers organizations, which did everything to ensure that they did not relent the pressure, and eventually we were released. I want to thank them all. So today I intend to have a very quick discussion to share my perspectives with you on what I think the dynamics of the conflict are and how we ought to look for peace. What are the challenges and what are some of the things that we may do or may not do to be able to get the two parties to the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fontem, for your remarks. This is how we are going to proceed with the question and answer session. Dr. Weiss is going to take the first question, ask the first question to you. You will take some notes and prepare to respond. I will give you the second question, and then we'll give you time to respond before we take 2 more questions. I see that you're very emotional about your friends being in jail, and I see that your story is painful to all of us. It's painful that our people are going through so much. It is an opportunity for us to really think about what is happening in our country, ask some critical questions, and see how we find a way to really bring about peace. Because too many people have died unnecessarily. It is a sad situation to see how many decades of hard work, of progress has been destroyed destroyed by the military invasion of our country. I'm going to ask Dr. Weiss if she has any remarks to make before we proceed with the questions that are coming in.
Well, just briefly, I want to acknowledge, first off, your professional accomplishments, and secondly, the dedication and tremendous organizing and patience that I know it must take to build a large-scale, peaceful protest movement. And then to be called a terrorist for doing that, you know, and captured and imprisoned, and your life threatened really with the death penalty for that is, I don't know, I guess I don't have words to express just how horrible that must have been. And I'm glad you're here with us today, that you've made it through and you're continuing your peaceful efforts to find resolution. So that's all I have for now. Dr. Kilo, should we go to questions now?
No,
or Dr. Neba?
Yes, maybe I should be able, let me share some perspectives on the escalation of the conflict, why it escalated,
Yes.
and some of the things that the dynamics, and so that I put my points clearly into perspective before we can have the questions.
Yes.
Please.
Sorry, we jumped ahead.
Yeah, backroom man, please. Can I have my slides? Yes, next one. Yes. By the time we were released from prison, the conflict had already taken a different dimension, owing largely to the intransigence of the government, the lack of good faith, and their failure to deliver on some of the reforms they had promised. Because you remember that prior to our arrest, we had been on the negotiation table with the government and requested them to do a number of things. But what the government representatives wanted actually was just for us to suspend the strike. And knowing who we were dealing with, we told them that it was not possible, because we knew that the assimilation at that time, we were still battling with assimilation. Because knowing that it was a scheme that had been laid out and that they were ready to take it to the finishing line, we didn't have to give them room to continue. So what actually happened was that government lack of good faith, the failure to deliver on the reforms promised, the economic benefits of the conflict were fueling things on the government side, because it is important to note that while our people refused to budge because they were not sure that government was going to follow up, government officials were also enjoying the allowances, the fat allowances, and the hefty sums disbursed for intelligence gathering and, you know, the secret service operations that were going on. So most of them wanted the conflict to fester, but they did not know that it was ever going to get to the point at which we eventually had it. Then our people also were resolved to resist oppression. They had taken that decision to resist oppression, and they were ready to take it to the end. Then there was a strong diaspora support, and the social media was helping things. So there was a lot of mobilization, and every day, nothing was, things that used to happen in the dark were now brought to light, and it was very easy for people to know what was going on. So the government found it very difficult while we were in prison. Now, if you look at the conflict dynamics, you will see that I've already mentioned that within the government, there were people who were enjoying fat sums. It has continued even up till now. It has continued up till now. The money that is given by government is more or less not accounted for. And it permits the government to embark on frivolous ventures which require a lot of money, but which do not yield any results. For instance, the National Dialogue had a budget of about 7 billion all that money went into private pockets, and at the end of the day, it has not yielded anything significant. Government ministers continue to collect a lot of money, move around with security detail in the name of going to talk to the people in the regions, and all those allowances are very important. It is even thought abroad that some of those ministers have bought houses and a very important property under false names abroad. So it is important that we look at why this war persists. Some of these people are making a lot of money. Then the military apparatus is also making a lot of money. At some point in this conflict, if a soldier did not want to go to the northwest or southwest regions, as they call it, if a soldier did not want to go and fight in southern Cameroon, you had to pay a fee. So you will pay a certain amount for your name not to figure on the list. So those were means by which military hierarchy would enrich themselves. Then the money that is disbursed for soldiers' operations is collected directly from the treasury. So when they take this money in bags, the amount that actually gets down to the soldiers is not is never known, and so it has created a lot of it has emboldened a lot of people to continue to fan the flames of the conflict, since it brings a lot of benefit. Then if you notice from the outset of this conflict, soldiers usually went around in people's houses, knocked on the door. If a 12-year-old boy showed up, he was arrested, and his parents were told that if you don't bring us the equivalent of about $300, about $150,000, if you don't bring us that money by 3 o'clock, we're taking your child to Yaoundé. And that's how we found ourselves with children in prison who were in their underpants because they were taken from home. Those whose parents were able to raise that money within the twinkle of an eye were able to go back home, but those whose parents were poor spent the 8 months, and some are still there. So we can imagine right now we have situations of soldiers breaking into granaries, carrying food, plantains, chickens, pigs, and taking them away. They even raid whole communities, collect motorbikes, which are a source of livelihood to most of the people, since they don't have jobs. The government did it. It was systematic for the people to live in poverty. And so they collect all these motorbikes and they take them to sell in neighboring towns at giveaway prices. This is how many of the soldiers have been able to enrich themselves. And the conflict is giving a lot of money. Then we have those who call themselves Anglophones in the government. These Anglophones in the government are people who believe, we will talk about that very shortly. These are people who, these are people who think that the status quo should remain unperturbed. And so they have been coming up with one fictitious scheme after another, promising government that they can hold a meeting or talk to a number of people concerning the conflict, or they can subvert the action of the diaspora or they can subvert the people's will in a way that will satisfy the government. And so in exchange, they get a lot of money from the government, and they do everything they do fails, because in the last 4 years, Atanganji and other people who are supposed to be responsible for stemming down the Anglophone, the Southern Cameroon's liberation struggle, or wipe it out completely, have not made any significant progress, because most of the time, the schemes that they come up with are only meant to enrich them. Then we also have a diaspora which has raised a lot of money, but much of that money has not been seen on the ground, and the money is thought to be in the neighborhood of millions of dollars, and the people, it is affecting the manner in which the liberation struggle is conducted. What I think is that if these monies were channeled through were sent through the right channels to the targeted areas, I think that even the humanitarian situation of the people, the internally displaced persons and the refugees in neighboring Nigeria would have seen a change in their lives. Next slide, please. Now we look at internal divisions. Even as this money is fueling, the benefits that people are making are fueling the conflict and hardening sides. The government, the Southern Cameroon's liberation movement is also polarized. I would like us to look first of all at the government. Within the government, there are those who think that this problem should be given the due attention. Those ones have been silenced by the radicals who think that they can get to the end of it using guns and weapons. And as a result, the government has the hardliners are carrying the day for the moment, but it is costing the government billions and in debts and in infrastructural projects that have to be shelved. And recently, the government had difficulties paying an installment of a loan owed to China, and they had to pay interest in the neighborhood of almost 150 billion. So it must be noted that Cameroon has taken a lot of loans from China, and most of the money, and about a quarter of their national territory has been given to China, and nobody knows what for. And so with this war and the divisions within, a lot of things are going wrong for them. Boko Haram has been emboldened in the north because most of the soldiers who were trained by the US government to fight Boko Haram have been moved to the southern Cameroons to fight the liberation movement there. And so having no significant resistance up, Boko Haram is now riding roughshod. In the east, selected from the Central African Republic are also using the territory of Cameroon to launch attacks on the government forces and their antagonists and their rival organizations. So it is a significant development. Within the Southern Cameroonian setup, there are three different groups. You have the Unionists, you have the Federalists, and you have those who stand for independence. And it is important to note that the Unionists are simply there for the money that government gives them, and because they have to say what the government wants to hear, and in exchange, they get appointments, they get all the things that make their life comfortable, even at the expense of their people. But somehow they know that the people are determined and that they're never going to break their will. Then there are the Federalists who know that there is a problem. Some of them are afraid to express the problem. And so they are moonlighting as Federalists, because after we were arrested for federalism and released at the time when the restoration of independence was now the trend or the stock in trade, the government felt more comfortable listening to people who branded themselves as Federalists, since it was a less harsher expression of the extreme. So at the end of this whole saga, the Federalists have a problem amongst themselves, because the government created the impression that if they were ready to, that at some point the government created the impression that they were going to give a federal system of 4 states. And then again, at some point they said, well, they'll give a federal system of 10 states. So if you look at the federalists, they are divided into three. There are those who are for the 10 state, there are those who are for the 2 state, and there are those who are for the 4 state. And it simply has created greater confusion amongst them. Now, since they cannot face their problem, the federalists have now turned their guns onto those who think that that our people have had, independence is the only way out. So when you look at what the federalists are doing now, the federalists are actually fighting not the government, but those who stand for independence. And that is the greatest contradiction in this whole issue, because the federalists themselves seem to be aware that their bid is never going to materialize. And that, but if they focus on the restoration movement, at some point the government will have mercy, but that will never really happen. So those are some of the internal contradictions within the Southern Cameroons. Then you also have the diaspora, which also has emerged as a new dynamic in the conflict. You have several governments in the diaspora. You have each person claiming to have ministers, claiming to be the leader of the struggle, claiming to be the one to take a decision, claiming to be the one to do this or do that. And at the end of the day, the people are now in the middle. It has affected the conduct of the liberation struggle and made it a little bit, more difficult for the stakeholders, other international organizations which have taken interest in the conflict, to be able to do something that is, constructive or meaningful. Their impact has not been felt because most people at some point they hold back, because at times when one of the movements makes a move, one of the organizations makes a move, the other tries to counter to prove charge, or they are the government, or this one is not the government, and so on. And so it has been a lot of bickering, and it is turning many people away from the conflict. Now, in the midst of all this, there has been a steady growth of civil societies. And one of the tools, I would like to talk specifically about 2 civil society organizations which are emerging and which are playing a very constructive role. We have the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations, and we also have the Southern Cameroons International Town Hall. While one basically seeks to bring the international community and other international stakeholders to arrive at a procedure by which this conflict can be resolved, the Southern Cameroons International Town Hall is building a nexus around which Southern Cameroonian citizens can sit down and meaningfully discuss their problems and come to a consensus. So it is an educational platform. And I think that these 2 organizations ought to synergize and build their effort collectively, so that the people of Southern Cameroons have the right information, they have the right political education, and will be able to make the right choices when the time comes. Next slide. There's also a humanitarian crisis that has emerged in this conflict, and there are food shortages, with a lot of farming communities decimated, granaries destroyed, and farms also destroyed. You remember there were times that we saw Cameroon soldiers destroying farms because they felt that those farms were hideouts for restoration forces. Then there are other social problems that have also crept in. You have prostitution and the abuse of the girl child. This is very common in those cities where most of the people have fled to as internally displaced persons. They've moved to towns like Douala, Bafoussam, and so on. And because of the economic hardship, some of them have been forced into activities that are not dignifying at all. Then we have also noticed that there's been a systematic elimination of males. There's been a systematic elimination of male children. The army takes delight in shooting down able-bodied young men from the ages of 12 upwards. And yesterday again in Malende, about 17 were killed. The army just came into a residential area and sprayed them like a locust. And so it is attaining genocidal proportions. In fact, there is a genocide going on in Southern Cameroon, and it's important for the world to look at that, because we do not have to wait for everybody to be wasted before a decision is taken about what is going on. We'll talk about that when we come to our recommendations and conclusions. Then there is theft of cultural artifacts. We are undergoing what I can call a cultural genocide, because Cameroon government soldiers are stealing from palaces. They are breaking into palaces and stealing away artifacts that are several hundreds of years old. And this is a crime, and the world needs to look into this very seriously. Then there are other grave human rights violations, beheadings, and some of them are carried out on video. They are carried out on video, and I think it is a serious thing. It's a serious problem that the world needs to look at. Next slide, please. Now, in the midst of all these things and beyond, there is a need for us to look at what we need to do. Some international efforts have been going on. The US Congress has done a number of resolutions, several resolutions concerning the conflict in Cameroon and the fate of Southern Cameroon. There have been a series of UN statements on the ceasefire. The EU has spoken. France has just said something that Mr. Biya should look for a solution to in a very, offhanded manner. And then we have noticed the passivity of the African Union and others and the sub-regional body, CEMAC. So, so far there hasn't been, but I think the US has more than every other organization or country made a bolder move by sanctioning Cameroon and taking them off the AGOA list. So some of their benefits have been curtailed. They have also cut down on their military assistance, and but I think that more still has to be done. Next slide. Yeah, so far we are also experiencing contrasting approaches to peace. In Cameroon, there are those who still think that peace can be achieved through arms, and there are those who also think that they can talk to the liberation movement and find a solution. But for the most part, what the Cameroon government wants to do is to keep the Southern Cameroon liberation movement in disarray. That is why they have made very conflicting signals, and we'll talk about it under the Swiss initiative. They have also spoken they've had one or two contact meetings with the leader of the Southern Cameroon's liberation struggle, Sisiku Julius Ayuk-Tabe, and the aim, I believe, is that by creating that impression, people will think that the end is near, and that the resistance will somehow win, because that has normally been the strategy of the government of Cameroon to make believe. And if you see how they have been putting the cart before the horse, it tells you that the Cameroon government is not very committed to resolving the problem. You see the bilingualism committee, which was created to solve the problems that had been raised by the unions and so on. Even up till now, nothing is going on. Yes, they have not achieved anything. They set up demobilization and disarmament, demobilization and rehabilitation committee, and set up camps where they made the young men think that something good was in store for them. But of recent, it has been made public that about 200 of those boys have disappeared. Nobody knows where they are. They have neither returned to the camps where they were, or escaped to neighboring countries. So it somehow, the government has isolated those boys and is eliminating them systematically to reduce the threat of a relapse in the event where what they set out to do. Because we are told that the conditions in those camps are really deplorable and that at times the boys have to go begging for food. So this is a government that is not committed to resolving this problem. They even went ahead and forged a national dialogue, which from the outset turned out to look like a national dialogue, but it became an intra-Cameroon dialogue, and where the issue of Southern Cameroons was never properly discussed. And so the solutions do not even reflect the aspirations of the people of Southern Cameroons. So it is to tell you that nothing is ever going to come out of that government if we have to wait. They have found a way of deceiving the international community to the extent that every time there is an important discussion going on around the world, they too synchronize their program to hold an event that is related to the conflict, so that everybody says, well, we're waiting for the outcome, and the outcome is never really good enough. Then we have the Swiss initiative. The Swiss initiative, I will talk very briefly on this Swiss initiative, because from the outset, the Swiss gave the impression, the Swiss Humanitarian Dialogue, HD, the Swiss NGO Humanitarian Dialogue, which we refer to as HD. When they came on board, they made it clear that they had the mandate of the government of Cameroon, and that they were going to mediate in the conflict. But at the same time, when they finally got the mandate of the Southern Cameroon's some of the Southern Cameroon's liberation groups, it turned out that they did not actually have the mandate of the government of Cameroon. They were now trying to use the mandate of the Southern Cameroon's liberation groups to secure the mandate of the government of Cameroon. And the world has been waiting to see what the Swiss initiative will yield. It is not yielding anything for the past 1 year. Nothing significant has gone on. They've gone to Switzerland about 3 times, and they've been conflicting messages. You know, at one point they say they are providing capacity building for the leaders, and at another point they say they are offering mediation services, and at another point you see them with some of the Southern Cameroon's restoration forces in Ghana, meeting with them in Ghana, and you know, and so on. So, but what from what my personal experience with the Swiss from the very outset was tells me that the approach and the manner in which the Swiss, the HD, the manner in which HD got involved from the very beginning might have created the problems that that we are facing right now, because nothing is going on and there is a lot of uncertainty, but most people would expect that something should be going on. So they probably will talk about that later. Next slide. Yes. I think that there is we need to think or consider the way forward. We need to consider the way forward, and the UN and the international system have a role to play. They should consider a fact-finding mission to the to the Southern Cameroons. Yes, because the scale of the humanitarian disaster needs to be ascertained, and the violations of rights of persons and communities need to be also established. The civilians need to be protected. It is absolutely important because the death toll has shot up astronomically, but somehow we continue, the international media and reports continue to reflect figures of 2018, and we are bothered and we are really troubled by that development. Then there is right now it is even expected that it is estimated that more than 15,000 people have died in this conflict, because when you continue to say that 3,000, and figure 3,000 came out, there have been more than 15 massacres. So at least it should be at least 3,010 or 3,015 or 3,032 plus each massacre that takes place, including excluding the little killings that take place here and there. So robust measures have to be taken to attenuate the humanitarian crisis. Yes, the United Nations will have to play a key role, and they should oversee that mediation process. Because if you look at the profile of HD and the type of conflicts they have mediated, it is, and their success rate, I don't think that HD has the teeth to be able to bite a stubborn regime like the one in Yemen, to be able to exert the kind of leverage that is required of an organization or of a mediator. Consider sanctions, yes, which tries to disrupt the mediation process that will be set up. Yes, I think that the UN needs to do that. There's a need to consider sanctions against the government of Cameroon and any other party, any other person trying to disrupt any mediation process that will be established. Next. Generally, La République has a deficit of good faith. So we don't really expect much from them. But if they were to prove that they are committed to resolving this conflict in a peaceful manner, if they are sincere about what they have been claiming, the first step will be to pull back their army across the River Mongo. Yes, because that will be the first sign. If they pull back their army across the River Mongo, I can personally say without doubt that the armed groups are going to lay down it will be very easy for them to lay down their weapons. But if La République does not pull out its army, so long as that army is there, this conflict is going to persist. Then there is a need to release Sisiku, Julius Ayub Tabe, and all the others in detention. It is absolutely important. These are measures that will show that La République du Cameroon is ready and willing and committed to resolving the problem. You do not have to release Sisiku Ayub Tabe and leave the army. You do not have to withdraw the army and keep Sisiku Ayub Tabe. If you withdraw the army and release Sisiku Ayub Tabe, then so that the people know that they have their freedom to talk about their problem and to go around. Then within the Southern Cameroon Liberation Movement, there is a need for a more concerted strategy. Right now, the action is too individualistic. The groups are too self-centered, and at times even there is no control mechanism. So at the end of the day, each person does what he wants and disrupts the other at will without any fear. But if the liberation movements come together in a concerted manner and come up and hammer a unified approach, it will help them. Then there is this unified approach also means that the people of Southern Cameroon need to think of their stake in this liberation struggle and make their impressions and their feelings heard. Already CDN and the Southern Cameroons International Town Hall are doing different, they are working from different angles. It is important that they see how they can mobilize the people of Southern Cameroons and all the stakeholders, the politicians, even some of the so-called federalists. Bring them to the table and focus on what unites them and not what divides them. And let there be an agreement on what the procedure for resolving this problem can be. In that way, there will be a quicker response from both the international community and the people who set out, the people of Southern Cameroons who embarked on this journey in the first place. So I think that is that. I will make my conclusions when we are done with the question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I think we'll begin now with some questions, and we received questions both before and during the presentation. And so what we're going to do, Dr. Kilo and I, is I will take one question, read it aloud, and Dr. Kilo will do that with another question. So we'll take two at a time, and Dr. Fontem can then reply to either or both as he sees fit. So the first one, Dr. Fontem, says the questioner, as the founding Secretary General of the consortium, the Civil Society Consortium, it's clear that you began as a civil society movement and gave impetus to a liberation movement, which never received mass acceptance several years before. Now that the struggle has been flooded by the same interests who had a difficult takeoff, what is the role of civil society in reshaping things? So I guess there are a couple issues embedded there, but I think the big question is the role of civil society and maybe sort of what's different moving forward as opposed to in the past. And hang on,
I'll take the second
Dr.
question.
Kilo. Yeah.
Yes, let me take the second question.
Okay, the second question actually reads, Dr. Fontem, wait, hang on a second, I'm moving my cursor too fast. Question number 2. Yeah. Dr. Fontem, when you look at the disorder within the ranks of the liberation struggle and the disunity among the leaders, and you compare it to the cohesion and serenity which gave thrust to the consortium, do you regret starting the process in the first place? That's the question. Question number 2. Over to you, Dr. Fontem.
Yes, I think I will see if I can fuse both questions and answer them as one question. I think the role of civil society is very, very critical in this liberation. It is not possible for the political groups that exist to do the kind of mobilization that we expect because the loss of trust that we have experienced, especially in financial matters in the last year or two. And so civil society groups need to play their role as they have always done. I am one of those who believes that you cannot change the winning formula. For this struggle to take off effectively, we took time as a civil society organization to educate our people, give them the information, and explain to them why we were embarking on that course of action. And we told them what our expectations were, and we also told them what the fears and the challenges might be. And so that once the people came on, they knew what they had signed on to. And we tried as much as possible to pursue that with honesty and diligence. Now, now that political action has now rent the stage. It has, kept so many people on the fringes. It is important for these civil society organizations to play their role. I just mentioned the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation. These are people who are non-partisan. They don't belong to any of the political movements. The Secretariat of the Southern Cameroon International Town Hall does not belong to any of the political organizations. And so if they are able to bring out all other Southern Cameroonians who are non-aligned, then I think that is what we need to do so that the right thing can be done to foster the goal that the people have set for themselves. Now, when you talk about the disorder and among the leaders, at times it is disheartening, and it gets to a point of devastation. You might be tempted to regret some of those things, but one thing you must realize is that in a liberation struggle of this nature, there is bound to be self-interest, there is bound to be group interest, and which will not always run, which may always run against the collective interest of the people. For instance, there are people in this struggle who think that they have a right, by virtue of the role they have played or the participation that we see, they have a right to have access to certain things and benefits when the country gets independent, and it will affect the way they resist constructive or positive change, or constructive or positive action, or they will resist collective action. But I think that gradually people learn, and with time, new realities emerge, and some of those people who have self-interest and limited group interest will eventually come to realize that the interest of the collective is better than the private interest, because within the collective interest you can still have your fair share. So I think I do not regret as such, although from time to time I feel bad that it is difficult for us to achieve oneness in the manner in which the consortium did it with very little difficulty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just in my mind, one could ask the same question about, the questioner asked, do you regret the mass protests? I think one could also ask the question about the onset of armed struggle and what result that has brought as well. But I will move on to the next questions. Dr. Fontem, you did not mark the first or second anniversaries of your release from prison in 2018 and 2019, respectively. So why this third one? What's the significance?
Yes.
So before we'll continue with the two questions, right? So we can get through as many as possible. Go ahead, Dr.
Question number 4 for Dr. Fontem: is the Swiss process, is it a Swiss process or Swiss initiative? And why is there so much controversy around it? Is it a Swiss process or a Swiss initiative, and why is there so much controversy around it? I know
and I think we could wrap that in with the next question too, because the next question is on the same topic. Is the Swiss NGO Humanitarian Dialogue capable of bringing peace to the Cameroon? So maybe we'll have those three addressed together.
Absolutely. Okay.
I think when I came out of prison, let me start with why I didn't mark the first and the second. When I came out of prison, I think I was still on the run. By the time the first anniversary of my release came up, I was still on the run. I was much too, I was still in the lion's den, and it was difficult to express myself without attracting the kind of barbaric severity that you see them meting out on people. because we must realize that for a considerable length of time, when I came out of prison, I was still under surveillance. And I was monitored very regularly, and the people did not hide. They often came and they told me that they were actually there to see what I was doing and to ask me questions, and they interrogated me from time to time on my activities. And at times I'm going somewhere and I just realized that they've already informed those ahead of me that I'm going down that road. And so one of them would just tell me that we knew that you were coming. So it was enough to tell me that I wasn't too safe, especially because I had stayed quiet. Every advice I had given was not being heeded. And so I did not want to say anything anymore, because when you're dealing with a system that is intrinsically wicked, and you also have to protect yourself to be able to do what you need to do for your people, because the first thing is that you must apply wisdom. So in 2019, I was undergoing a transition, and it wasn't possible for me, although I was already trying to see how I could bring assistance to some groups in the diaspora and build unity. And but I think that I am much more steady, and I thank my friends in the international community and within the Southern Cameroons community who convinced me that it was necessary for me to share my perspective with the people and let my feelings be heard, especially because things have not really gone the way we really expected. Now, the Swiss process or Swiss initiative? I think that it is, to my mind, I see it as an initiative, because if it were a process, then La République would have already been on board, La République du Cameroon would have already been on board, and many things would have already been established, steps and stages. But I think it is still an initiative because only one side has acceded to it, has accepted or endorsed it, and La République has endorsed it, at least to our knowledge. There are people who say that La République endorsed it and then withdrew, but we do not have any evidence of that, because La République has rather used the Swiss initiative as a shield to protect themselves. And there's something that I want to say, and many people may not like it, but I think that I have to give my very rational, my own interpretation of what I see. It is not, I will not just believe in something because everybody says that something is blue doesn't make it blue. And because you notice that every time in the course of 2019, every time there was a major international encounter, HD was having a meeting with the people, either before or after. And before the UN General Assembly, HD invited some of the groups to Switzerland, and it created the impression that something was going on, and really slowed down international momentum when the issue came up for discussion. When the EU had their meeting, it was the same thing. The HD had just had a meeting with some of the leaders, and the information was that that they were talking, whereas nothing was actually going on. So, and La République is not saying no to the Swiss overture, to HD's overture. They are not saying no, and they are not saying yes either. And the reason why La République will not say no is because if they say no, then the process will collapse immediately, and more potent stakeholders might come on board. And so to keep their buccaneering expedition alive, to continue the fighting, they have to pretend as if they are in, as if they are not in. And that moment of that period of uncertainty gives them a passage through which they can continue to kill people in southern Cameroon. So I think that that is what La République is using the Swiss initiative to achieve. But are they capable of bringing peace? When I look at what HD is doing right now and the discussions that they have had with other people who have been to their meetings in Switzerland, I think that there is a need for us to walk back a little. There's a need to and see. For most of the people who went to Switzerland, the first message they came out with, and which was what the Swiss had groomed them, that, oh, right now the world has 21 conflicts, and Cameroon is just, the conflict in Cameroon is just a minuscule one. And if you don't seize the moment now and accept what La République is offering, then the world might turn their eyes away, and your conflict will end up like the one in Casamance. It was a monotony that came out of Switzerland. And so when you look at that, you see that the people were likely bamboozled into accepting into giving them their mandate to HD. And it excludes the role that they play in pushing out other organizations that were also interested in either facilitating or mediating in the conflict. But I think that on their own, HD has made it clear that they don't have what it takes to compel a government like Cameroon, Cameroon's, to accede to the negotiation, to come to the negotiation table, and to yield to whatever decisions will be agreed there.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fontem, for your presentation, your responses to these questions. We see that the questions have moved from the chat room to quick Q&A, and we basically see two main questions here. So I would suggest that you take a little break while Dr. Weiss talks to us about the peace process and, what it would take to get to the peace process. So you can answer those last questions.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thanks,
okay.
Dr. Kilo. And after that, I'm also interested in your thoughts, Dr. Kilo, from your perspective as an expert on fragile states, how you think that relates to this situation. Does it help explain, for example, the actions of the government in any way, the government of Cameroon? In any case, I think, it's very interesting about this Swiss initiative. But I think one of the major things hampering it is that, as I understand it, there are these two branches, shall we say, of the independence movement. One of those branches is agreeing and participating with the Swiss, and the other branch is not. And so this allows the government to say, I don't know if they're saying this, but it allows them to say, well, we don't know who to talk to, or the process isn't going forward because, there's not full participation. So on the side of those seeking independence. So I think a significant step in moving a peace process forward, whether with the Swiss or with some other mediator, is for these two branches to coordinate at least. I don't think, in my view, it doesn't necessarily mean they all have to come under one leader. It could remain as two groups, and agree, okay, we work with the Swiss, maybe under some conditions you lay out, or let's together declare this initiative failed and seek out together another mediator. Or maybe you give some conditions, like if we don't see some commitment from the Cameroon government to truly participate within X amount of time, then we will declare that this initiative has failed, or something like that. But the key thing is that the two branches, I think, need to either both work with the Swiss or both declare they are not going to. I think that would probably be the most fruitful next step. And then it just makes it much harder for the government to claim that they don't know who to talk to or something along those lines. That's just my take on that. There are plenty of peace processes have multiple parties at the table. So in my view, it isn't critical that you all come under one leader necessarily, although in some ways it does simplify things if you do, but I don't see it as critical. Anyway, that's just my thoughts for now. Dr. Kilo, how about you?
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about fragility. The concept of fragility actually came up when the MDGs were being discussed at the end of 2000, and it was seen that so many
the
countries—
Millennium Development Goals, for those who don't know.
Absolutely, the Millennium Development Goals. Now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the SDGs. So between the MDGs and the SDGs, we had an assessment of fragile states in Africa that were never going to meet the MDGs. How were they going to ever meet the Sustainable Development Goals? Because there were countries that had attained middle income status and others that were in fragility. And now that gave us a chance to really define fragility. Now, in 2008, we created in the African Development Bank a fragile states unit, and I happen to be the first head of that fragile states unit to come up with policies, definitions, decide which states are fragile states, why are they fragile states, and we came up with 3 reasons for fragility. The first one is that there were countries that, due to the big issue of climate change, they were having natural disasters and their economies were being disrupted by natural disasters. So how will you see the African countries signing up to the climate change program, International Climate Change Program? A good example of a fragile state that was affected by natural disaster is the Mozambique. I've forgotten the year, but they had this big flood that actually led to a lot of loss of life in the country. So things like any tsunamis or anything that earthquakes would be, the Haitian earthquake, for instance, is a cause of fragility to that country. So we have natural disasters that can cause fragility. Then we have the issue of mismanagement. There are countries that are totally mismanaged and, they don't have any conflict, they don't have any natural disaster, but their leaders just mismanage them. I can give an example of mismanagement mixed with conflict in the case of the DRC, but a good one in West Africa is Togo. Togo for a long time was under the Ayadama dictatorship and was considered a fragile state because it was completely mismanaged and almost bankrupt. But where I would put Cameroon now is under the mismanagement rather than the conflict or natural disaster. So, but what has actually happened to Cameroon? It started off with mismanagement. It mismanaged just as teachers and lawyers strike, and it has gotten now into the very bad combination of conflict and mismanagement. Cameroon, for one, is one of the most corrupt countries in Africa. It's been in the indices for years and years. Everybody knows it's either second most corrupt or first most corrupt. And I think it sort of fights to want to be the leading most corrupt country in Africa. So if you look at Cameroon's peers, you would see Ghana, you would see Cote d'Ivoire, and you just look at the images that come out of these 3 countries, Cameroon's images, Ghana's images, Cote d'Ivoire's images. And what do you see? The infrastructure in Cameroon is collapsed. The road infrastructure, markets, everything falling apart. At one point, it was the airport in Douala. The airport building, after a rainfall, was just falling apart and there was water dripping everywhere. People were trying to check in. So the country is so badly mismanaged that, for instance, if you're trying to ship a container from the United States to Nigeria, for instance, they can deliver you door to door. You can pay Maersk, and they will clear the container for you in the whatever country, Ghana, whatever, and it will be delivered door to door. Now, Cameroon, in my experience, is the only African country that every single containerized cargo gets to the port of Douala and is stuck, and nobody will do you a door-to-door delivery in Cameroon because of corruption, because of, nobody wants to deal with the corrupt system that is established at the port of Douala. So you cannot do door-to-door in Africa to the only country, Cameroon. Now, fragility and the conflict, how do you resolve it? Coming back to the issue, if the actions of the military that is seen by Cameroonians, but also by the whole world, plays to the expectations of the human rights situation and the human rights abuses. For instance, just the fact that for a 3-month period, Cameroon cut off Northwest and Southwest regions from internet gave the impression that something was going on that the country was hiding and didn't want the world to see, and everybody expected the worst kind of human rights abuses, and the images came out and proved that. But Cameroon is a sovereign country, so to go in on a humanitarian basis to try and resolve the conflict gets a little bit challenging because the country will claim sovereignty. It's an internal affair, so we can manage it. But the crisis is getting worse because as more and more people on the ground get affected by the military, you count Cameroonians, even in the diaspora, many people have been affected. There is a natural radicalization process, which probably wasn't the intention of the country, but the vast majority of Southern Cameroonians today don't want to live in a united Cameroon with a country that would allow its military to come into one part of the country and do damage to the population the way the Cameroon army is conducting itself at the moment. So for fragility, Cameroon now ranks one of the top fragile areas in Africa, and we need to see how that country will resolve their fragility problem. But it's going to be a huge challenge, and I leave it at that.
Thanks for those insights. Okay, shall we take the last questions now? So first we have a brief comment from an attendee. Dr. Fontem, thank you for your engagement and sacrifices towards the liberation of the Southern Cameroons. Next one is a question. Why do you think some of you, including Mr. Agborbala and Mr. Paul Ayaba, were released, while others who were arrested at the same time, like Mr. Mancho Bibixi, are yet to be released? Bibixi, right? Correction, Paul Aya, not Paul Ayaba. So that's one, and Dr. Kilo, want to do the last? You're on mute, I think.
Okay. Yes, I am unmuted now. I have to find a way of getting to the last question. Oh, well, all right. I'll definitely go here. Okay. Last Q&A is how can Southern Cameroonians be talking about independence and the time you're saying, oh gosh, this one is a little bit complex. All right. You're telling Amberland fighters to lay down their arms when we need to be building an army. And secondly, I think that's sort of the last question. Let me just put them together.
I think LR means La République.
La République can never be trusted. They may tend to withdraw, then come back. So why should, basically it's the same question. So you're saying the Amber fighters should lay down their arms when you have a government in La So if the fighters lay down their arms, the government will come and massacre them. So what do you have to say about that? In other words, advising the fighters to lay down their arms, at the same time talking about independence, when La République cannot be trusted and could come back and massacre the fighters. So that's sort of a very complex question there, but I guess Dr. Fontem can respond. So over to you, Dr. Fontem.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Gaze. I think, let me start with the last one, laying down their arms. No, I didn't say they should lay down their arms. I said that in the course of my in the course of our discussion, I did raise the point that the United Nations should take its place in this conflict, and that if the United Nations takes its place in the conflict, the protection of civilians will be achieved. And the United Nations cannot protect civilians without getting involved on the ground. That is what it normally is. And if La République is committed to that, to resolving this conflict, then moving their troops back across the river means that they will leave our territory and allow the United Nations to do what they're supposed to do. And with the United Nations in, then our forces, the restoration forces, will not have a big issue, will not have an enemy to fight. So that is how it is. You must also realize that the one thing that has been going on, when the Swiss HD came on board, there were some fighters who felt that the war had come to an end and they gave up. It tells you that any move that is genuine, that is any genuine move for peace that is well constituted or well constructed will receive acceptance. So will be accepted by the people. So I think that if La République is sincere in what they claim that they want to solve the problem, but we know they are not, because you must remember that these are just suppositions. Yes, these are just suppositions. La République hopes to achieve victory through the force of arms. They hope to resolve this problem through the force of arms. And as one of the moderators has just said, the point at which we are, the people of Southern Cameroon are more than ever resolved that they can no longer live together. Even a blind man can see it. So, because the violence that La République du Cameroun has shown means that if ever this problem is resolved and the two peoples have to live again together, Southern Cameroons will at that time become a captured people, because they would have been brought in through the force of arms. And it means that nobody will ever be able to, it will mean something, it will be worse than before. So to me, I think that the United Nations should come in and provide the needed leverage for the right solution to be found. Let us go back to the root causes of this conflict. And the root causes lie in the handing of the independence papers of one country to the president of another country. Once we go back to that, I believe that we can find a permanent solution to that conflict. Now, let me find out why, let me attempt a response to why Balam, Justice Aya and myself and I were released. I can't say exactly, but I have one or two suppositions. I believe that in releasing us, the government expected that we were going to do their bidding. And on the basis of the bidding, they will now be safe to release other people they thought were equally radical. But not getting what they wanted us to do, probably not achieving their goal, they now thought that they could now grab the other people in exchange for a solution. So that to me is a reason why they are keeping Mancho and Ben Terence and all the others. Probably they wanted us to, they were expecting that when we come out, we will just become lackeys and, you know, work with the government to further enslave the people, knowing that when we set that pattern, the others in prison would naturally queue up, but it might not have been the case. Maybe if in the absence of any other question, probably can I draw my conclusions?
Yeah, I think we're ready for that. Right, Dr. Kilo?
Yeah. Can I draw my conclusions?
Protocol-wise, I think when you conclude, none of us can really speak anymore. So
Okay.
Let me just say a big thank you to everybody who's been on this webinar, to my co-moderator for taking the time to join us and for your engagement in the Cameroon process. We've noted that, and we'll be looking to you whenever the need arises. For everybody who could not join today, it's, this is a celebration of Dr. Fontem Neba's 3rd anniversary from detention, release from detention. He's explained a lot. We've taken so much out of it, and we really appreciate it. Now, let me ask Dr. Rice if you have anything to say to Dr. Fontem, and then we can hear.
Thanks, Dr. Kilo. Well, first of all, I'm so happy to have made a new friend in you, Dr. Maggie Kilo, and pleasure to co-moderate with you. And of course, Dr. Fontem Neba, it's such a pleasure to work with you again, and looking forward to further engagement with you and on this situation, this conflict, this crisis. And thank you very much for including me in your discussions. So with that, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Reis and Maggie Kilo. In fact, I am very, very grateful to the two of you for accepting to grace this occasion and for enabling me to be able to document my views, on what is going on. I think that we have a crisis of unity of purpose. One of the things that La République du Cameroun has used as a pretext to continue the slaughter at home is the fact that they don't have who to talk to. And I have often said that it is not about who is leading, but it is about what we want to achieve as a people. And so as I speak, we have people in prison who have stood their ground, and they say nothing will move them. They will not budge until the Southern Cameroon has been freed from the stranglehold of La République du Cameroun. It is an immense sacrifice, and I salute Sisiku Ayub Tabe and Barrister Yambe, Deacon Tassang and others, Dr. Ndeche, Dr. Kwanga, Professor Awasum, and Bamford, Professor Kimeng and others, Senator Penn Terence and Manchu BBC, T. Conrad, and many others. Some came to Cameroon on a visit and were arrested. And because they had money on them, the police gave to either forgo the money or be accused of terrorism. And since they held to their money, people like Joseph Ngaling are still in prison today. He came from the United States because he would not let go of 500,000. They told him, they said, 500,000, that's about $2,000. No, sorry, that's about $1,000. Yes, that's about $1,000. And it tells you the kind of corrupt country we are living in. There are people who have died in prison, like Mr. Thomas, Tange Thomas. I know him personally because his children are my children's friends. And he used to stop by my office, and a very amiable person, simple, easygoing, someone who cannot hurt a fly. And the only reason why he found himself in prison was because he had skills that the government believed could be used to make guns. And so they took him from his welding shop. They took him from his welding shop. He used to manufacture cookers, ovens, and so on. They took him from his welding shop to Yaoundé, and he came back as a corpse. So what I'm saying is that for all these lives, villages burned, communities destroyed, traditional life obliterated, misery and poverty that has been unleashed on our people, those who have or who control political organizations that could bring some leverage to this struggle have a choice to unite or to unify their strategy. Because without unity of purpose, we will continue to turn around. Many people have said, oh, this fight is a long haul, and so on and so forth. But I think that it is not a long haul. If we do the right thing, the international community will come in. As we have spoken to some people in the international community, and we know that achieving good results and making things work for our people is not going to be it's not going to be an uphill task, because the facts of the conflict are clear. And the only reason why La République does not want to come to the table is because the facts are clear and they stand against them. But if we don't create the enablement, if we don't provide the enablement for them to come to the table, they will continue to give a pretext, find a pretext for not coming. So the people of Southern Cameroon have to do what they have to do, or they should do what they have to do to make sure that on their part, there are no blames. The international community should stand up and be firm against human rights violations and all other abuses that have come in with this war. In fact, the international community has to do everything to stop the war and let the people of Southern Cameroon be given an opportunity to express themselves and to say what exactly it is that they want, which has led them into this conflict. The conflict, it must be remembered, was started with simple demands, but the government the government blew it out of proportion, created a war, and the people now reached for their own arms to defend themselves. That is why they refer to it most often as self-defense. But at some point, it has escalated. In some cases, it goes beyond self-defense. But all this was because a war was declared in the first place. So to save that part of Africa, because Cameroon and Southern Cameroon straddle both the Central and West African sub-regions. So to save that part of Africa, it is important for the United Nations to play its role. It is important for the African Union to play its role. There are other dynamics involved in the African Union doing what it is supposed to do. There is the belief that those funding the African Union will not be favorable to an open discussion of the conflict. But if the people of Southern Cameroon walk their path finally, they toe their line the way they are supposed to toe it, and let the roles that are supposed to be played by the other stakeholders be clear, that somebody is not filling their role, then inevitably those who are lackluster or who are delaying in finding a solution to this problem will be held accountable. Our people have died, many are dying, and if we don't do the right thing, more people are still going to die. But I think that the United Nations has a responsibility to stop the government of Cameroon from continuing with this carnage, whether the people of Southern Cameroon find a means to do it on their own or not. If we have to stop the war, there is an urgent need for a fact-finding mission and a mission to protect. We should yield a mission to protect civilians in Southern Cameroon. With these few words, I thank you all for your kind attention, and I pray that we will find a solution to this conflict in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.